welcome back to another episode of the Rumcast. This is the podcast where we talk all things rum with the people who love and shape the category. As always, I am here with my co-host today. He is John Gulla. I'm Will Hookinga, by the way. I probably should have thrown that in there. But John, how's it going over there? What's up? What's new with you?
It's going well, Will. Thank you. And had a good week. And I was excited to talk about this on the podcast. Actually, I had a recent experience.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of cool. Probably everybody else on here may be like, oh, yeah, of course I've done that. But I had never done this one thing. So I took my family down south of Miami. There's a place called Homestead. You may have heard of it.
Wait, you can go farther south than Miami?
Believe it or not, Will.
Are you just in the ocean?
You can. No, before you hit the ocean, there's this place. And then you can even go further south into the Keys, believe it or not. But no, This Homestead lies between us and the ocean. So it's a rural area comparatively to the big city Miami stuff. And so there's a lot of land out there. And so it's nice, to get away for us city folk to get away into.
I just imagined it was like pure swampland once you got outside Miami is how I'm picturing it.
It's probably not far removed from that, or once was swampland. It is now farmland.
Okay.
And so
I have to remember that we have a good amount of Florida Rum Society listeners, so I probably shouldn't be so disrespectful in my characterizations of Florida.
I could say a lot of things about Tennessee, Will, but I will not.
You really
I won't
could
stoop to that level.
Believe me, I grew up in Alabama, where the only state that people ever can talk down on is Mississippi, which is completely undeserved. And by the way, I was born in Mississippi, so I can say that. But yeah, believe me, I know that I can't really dish it out.
We love our southern states, right? In fact, I just came back from Georgia on a work trip, and it was a fun trip, and I got to experience some of the South there, some fried chicken as well.
Oh yeah,
but nice. Yeah, it was really nice. But anyway, so I took my family out to Homestead, and was just trying to have a good day and enjoy the day out there. And we came upon a shake stand, and there's a little kind of, I guess, farm area there where they were selling.
Stand?
They were selling shakes.
Okay, so when you say like countryside and you say stand, I always imagine like a pie stand or something, like with some fresh baked pies, but a shake stand, that's interesting.
A shake stand, well, it's like, I guess it's their house, but then they also have part of it as their business, and they sell products like honey and this other stuff, but the primary thing they sell is milkshakes, yes, and juices.
Okay. All right.
Of fruit juices, right?
All right.
And so I'm looking at the menu, and my girls are getting, raspberry chocolate and mango or whatever they're getting, and I see a fresh squeezed cane juice drink.
Oh, okay, so like this is separate from the milkshakes. This is
right. So they were doing juices as well.
Cane juice milkshake, which is going to strike me as a little bit odd.
Interesting. So I was like, "Ooh, wow! I want to try this. I've never actually had just fresh pressed cane juice to drink."
There you go.
I've chewed on some before, but I've never had that, and I was like, "Ooh, that is nice." And I didn't know I could get that local. So he had a press in the back, small one, and I saw him actually pressing the fresh cane and made the juice, and it was fantastic. And so I asked him, do you grow that here? And he had no idea. He said, no, it didn't grow in his farm, but it was locally grown here in South Florida somewhere. He said there's a nearby place where he sources them from. He didn't have much more information than that. I was so interested, and he could tell, I was a rum, or I should say in this case, sugarcane nerd.
Did it remind you at all of, say, rum agricole or anything, or rums distilled from fresh sugarcane juice at all? Could you make those connections in your brain?
You absolutely can, I think. And obviously it's a far cry from rum, and it's not exactly the same, but you get the freshness, the grassy notes there that's in rum agricole, and even some, rums. I mean, you can pick some of that out. Clearly, it's easier to get the agricole and the cane juice rums. But there's notes that are like familiar and yet different. I've
had fresh cane juice before, but it was before I was into rum. It was during a trip to Hawaii, and I really don't remember that much about it.
It's nice. It's light. It's got a light quality, like you might imagine. It doesn't taste anything like coconut water, but that same kind of freshness that's there. That
I got you. Yeah,
natural, whatever it is, je ne sais quoi. So
I love finding reasons to say je ne sais quoi in conversation. It just makes you sound smart.
So it was a nice day and it was fun. But as I'm talking to this guy, I tell him, it eventually leads to the subject of rum. And I'm like, oh, yeah, so I promise you, Will, I don't normally do this to everybody I meet. I'm not like, yeah, I have a rum podcast. But in this case, it was relevant enough that I was like, so like I have this podcast that talks about rum and, I'm curious to know more about the sugar cane that you said it was grown here. And like I said, he didn't know anything, but he started espousing these things of like, well, I asked him, does he drink rum? He said, he's not too into rum. He likes, bourbon, which is not uncommon, right? But I asked him, what rums have you tried? Why don't you like rum? That's too sweet.
There we go.
And I was like, well, wait a second. He said, I was like, well, here's the thing. Not all rum is sweet. And so that led me to think about some of those things, which you coincidentally had an idea of like, hey, at some point we should cover rum myths, misconceptions, and those type of things. And we encounter it all the time.
Yeah.
And so I figured, you know what? We really do need to do that.
I love that story. And I think anyone listening to this who's been into rum for a while has had that same conversation with people. I remember one recently that sticks out in my mind because the rum is too sweet thing came up, and the way the person I was talking to described it was, every time I have rum, it makes me think of like baby's first drink.
Wow.
Which simultaneously like broke my heart and made me laugh, but also excited me at the opportunity to show someone that there's so much more,
Right, exactly.
But yeah, the idea of myths and misconceptions, I think a lot of these things that we want to talk about are things that there's an awareness of them out there. But one thing that is really cool that I can easily forget a lot of times is we'll get emails or messages and things like that from people who listen to the podcast who have really just only recently started to explore the category, and somehow they managed to learn things from the podcast, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And so I think having at least an occasional episode dedicated to discussing some of these myths, misconceptions. And actually, when we started discussing the idea, we were like, we should throw a third M in there for the sake of alliteration and for the sake of entertainment. We're also going to talk a little bit about marketing speak, which is another thing that like occasionally can feed some of these myths and misconceptions. But
yes,
we want to, today cover some ground, cover a few common myths, misconceptions, marketing speak that can be confusing when you're getting into the category, or even like, a lot of times I'll find myself circling back to some of these and being like, wait, I know that's like a misconception, but like, what are the specifics with it?
Right.
Like I have to almost do a refresher every now and then.
Especially when you're talking to somebody else, like in that case, that was an easy one, but there are other ones that you'll hear espoused and you're like, wait a second, I know that's not right.
I know that's not entirely right. Yeah.
Yeah. But you don't always have that information at your fingertips to really get into that with them or feel justified enough in how you're going to address it, I guess you would say. So I think part of the idea of doing this is for those listeners out there who may be new enough to rum to pick up some of these and learn a little bit, but then also for our audience who we know is experienced enough in rum, but may want a little bit of a refresher course and to remember how some of these can be talked about or discussed.
Right.
And why maybe they matter. I'm excited. I wrote down a few ideas to start with and excited to see how you respond to my ideas of myths and miscreants and miscreants.
Miscreants.
That's the third
category.
That's, miscreants is the last one. Those people are intentionally deceiving you. Myths and misconceptions. And I think it'll be fun for me to hear yours as well.
Wait, can I ask you before we get into it, or maybe we want to talk about this one, but how did you respond to his characterization of rum is too sweet?
So, the first thing I said is, although it's made from sugarcane, like what we're doing here, and sugarcane obviously has a high content of sugar, when you distill sugarcane, then the sugar content is very little to none, depending on, I didn't want to get into all the variables, and honestly, this was a 5-minute conversation that I didn't have all this time in the world, but basically told him, not all rums are sweet, and in fact, there's a lot out there that you can try that are closer to bourbon. in their profile, ex-bourbon casks, and I mentioned that. And I think I actually got around to him in some interest there in like, there was an aha moment there of like, well, I honestly didn't know that.
You actually, in that explanation, touched on one of my things that I want to talk about, which is part misconception to me and part marketing speak. But yeah, I want to circle back real quick before I get into that. One thing that I like to tell people with the whole, because the sweet perception can come from two different things, or sometimes both at the same time, one of which is if someone knows rum is related or comes from sugarcane in some capacity, obviously that's an easy connection to make to sweetness. The other one is they've had a rum that is actually sweetened post-distillation in some way, of which there are many. And, a lot of times people will throw in Captain Morgan or something like that, which is a spiced rum, and we don't even really think of in our brain in the same way. But to a lot of people, that's what rum is, or Malibu even, which is like, 20 something percent ABV, I think. Anyway, I like to tell people during fermentation, sugars, like you have to have sugars in order for fermentation to happen and to create alcohol during fermentation, which is why when whiskey is made, for example, they mash and like they cook it up, to create those sugars in the grain because they don't,
accessible.
They're not already in there like you have with molasses or with sugarcane juice, for example. But once something goes through the fermentation process and then is distilled, it doesn't matter if it comes from sugarcane juice, molasses, whatever, there's not going to be any sugar left on the other side. So that's, what I like to tell people. And from there, it's pretty easy to see that rum is basically made in a very similar way to whiskey or something else that they already have a frame of reference with. So that's kind of how I like to approach it. And slowly but surely trying to turn the tide.
It's funny you mentioned that, and the two different ways are actually, oh man, I'm going to go way super geeky and nobody is going to care about this, but in philosophy, there's something called epistemology, which is how you know things, right? And so you just mentioned two of the different ways of how you can know things. One is a priori, and one is posteriori, something like that. Gosh, I'm forgetting what it is, but it's something like that. And one means you have experience of, right? Posteriori, I think, is what it's called. Therefore, like you said, I tasted a rum, it was sweet, therefore rum is sweet. And then you have a priori, which is like armchair experience of thinking. You're saying, well, it comes from sugarcane. Sugarcane is sweet, therefore all rum is sweet. So we can absolutely cut that out if you're the only one that might be interested in that.
That's interesting.
But yeah, that's I just thought it was interesting you found the two different ways that people think we can know things. There you go. There's your Philosophy 101 course for the day.
Well, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, and I don't think you quite emphasized it in the way that I often see it emphasized, but this is something in the marketing speak category that like I always like, something about it grinds my gears a little bit. And here's the thing. I know if you're a rum company, you really want the whiskey drinkers. Like we want to convert the whiskey drinkers to rum.
Bring them in.
They want
some of that market. Yeah,
exactly. They want some of that market, and it's an easy transition in a lot of ways when you hand the right rum to someone who likes whiskey. But something I hear a lot is basically people say it in a lot of different ways, but I see a lot of companies emphasizing like, whiskey drinkers will like our rum because it's aged in ex-bourbon barrels. As if they have some sort of like exclusive production method involving ex-bourbon barrels that nobody else does.
We're not like those other rums.
Exactly, which when in fact that is like the most commonly used cooperage in all of aged rum. And also another thing about that is, to me, you're more likely to get a rum that will appeal to whiskey drinkers if you age it in new American oak barrels rather than ex-bourbon, because new American oak is what bourbon is aged in, right? And so you're going to pick up a lot of those characteristics. And that's not to say there aren't rums that have some of those whiskey-ish characteristics that are aged in ex-bourbon barrels, because, I mean, obviously Foursquare is one that is a great introductory rum for someone who likes whiskey, whether it's one of their releases or a tour release or whatever, and a lot of that rum is aged in ex-bourbon barrels. But to me, the rums that display the most bourbon-esque characteristics are ones that use New American oak, like you often see in a privateer or something like that. So anyway, you brought up the ex-bourbon barrel thing, and that's just something that sticks out to me sometimes. I see people really emphasize it and try to make that whiskey connection, and I'm just like, I get what you're doing, but like, you know.
Yeah, and it's an easy one, right? It's the easy answer to say, oh, you like bourbon? Well, this is aged in ex-bourbon barrels, and that just inherently makes sense to people.
It does, yeah.
So I get that. That's actually a really great point that I'd never considered, though, in terms of New American oak versus the ex-bourbon. And I totally actually get that, having tasted both a fair amount of times, and can see how both have that kind of bourbon-esque feel. But yeah, I kind of... You've put a light bulb off in my head at this moment in time, Will. I see. Even I am learning some of these misconceptions and thoughts, because I never thought of it in that way.
I think part of it for me is also like, I have plenty of whiskey drinking friends that I want to convert to rum just because I want more people to appreciate rum. But at the same time, I want them to like rum for what it is, Yeah. And so sometimes when like we go down to that level of trying to like make it too similar to whiskey, it's just kind of like, but also like it because it's rum, So I don't know if I'm communicating that clearly, but
I get where you're going in, and recall, as listeners will know, that's exactly what led me into rum.
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
The same thing, and kind of that bourbon into rum, and getting the similar kind of product, and I was sold in the same way. But, so to your point, I get where you're going with that of like, yeah, but let's make it rum appreciation for rum. At the same time, if it hooks you in, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to gatekeep. Like, I'm totally fine with meeting people where they are and making that connection. But I just think sometimes you see companies emphasizing the ex-bourbon thing in that kind of like, this makes like the fact that we age in ex-bourbon barrels makes our rum special or different, know? Yeah, and that just kind of like... do we really have to do this? Can we? Come on.
All right. Well, I think we covered one or two already somehow, but we should probably take a short break and get into the rest.
Let's do it.
And we're back to talk about more myths, misconceptions, and marketing speak. And we already covered a couple that I think probably everybody would think of when they start thinking about a subject like this. But I know there are lots of others, and I know we're going to mix in some that way. But go ahead and let me know, Will, what is something that you consider a myth, misconception, or marketing speak you want to bring up now?
Yeah, so this is a misconception that I still see thrown around a lot in forums online and stuff like that. And most of the time someone will jump in and point out the, exceptions to this maxim. I guess maxim, that's another M word, maxims.
Yeah, maxims.
So this is maybe a misleading maxim, but this idea that a lot of times when people are getting into rum, they want to know what rums don't have additives, right? And so one thing that gets thrown out a lot is, well, if you see that a rum is from Jamaica or Barbados, it won't have any additives. And this is the kind of thing where it's like most of the time it's true, but it's not totally true. And I also a lot of times see people say stuff like, well, if it comes from Barbados, they legally can't add sugar to rums, which I could think of examples in my mind of rums that came from Barbados that did have sugar added, but I was trying to make sure, like, is this idea of legality, is this true or not? And so, I did some researching, and I can't find anything that actually says that's illegal. I do think, obviously Foursquare, Mount Gay, St. Nicholas Abbey are brands from Barbados that are known for not adding sugar and emphasize it, especially Foursquare, for example. And that's part of the whole GI conversation is, exactly. That's a point in the GI, no sugar added post-distillation. But again, you can find examples of rum from Barbados. And when we talked to Don Ben in our previous episode about the new Stades rum that's being made at West Indies Rum Distillery, I think a lot of times people also think, well, the ones that have sugar are ones that are going, they bring up Plantation Barbados releases that go to France first,
right.
and like it's done in France, so that's allowed. But if you did it in Barbados, it wouldn't be allowed. But that's not entirely true. And he even talked about one of the new Stades rums has some sugar added post distillation, and it's done in Barbados. So again, I think that's a misconception that people have, and it's something to keep in mind as you're looking for rum to buy. And Jamaica does have a law. It's called the Jamaican Excise Duty Act that says, quote, except as may be otherwise permitted by the commissioner, nothing shall be added to any spirits in a distillery save coloring matter or water. So in this case, there is something that kind of legally prohibits adding sugar to Jamaican rum. However, just like I was making that example previously about once rum leaves a country, people can then kind of do whatever they want to it in lots of cases. This is another example where you could find someone who buys some bulk Jamaican rum in another country, and they do, add whatever they like to it, put it under their own brand, still say it's Jamaican rum. You'll find examples of that like that out there. And this is, again, where the GI conversation comes into frame. And the Jamaica GI is in limbo right now. A GI has to be created by the country, and then that GI has to be recognized by other countries in order to be enforced. And I believe there's aspects of the Jamaica GI for Europe that have been kind of stalled, scuttled. It hasn't been accepted by the EU. I don't even know if it's in condition right now to be accepted. But basically what I'm trying to say is like there isn't that mechanism in place for other countries to be able to say, no, you can't add sugar and call it Jamaican rum. So again, at the same time, you can find lots of Jamaican rum, whether it's Appleton, Hampton, Worthy Park, that's not going to have any sugar added to it. That style of rum is very prevalent in both Jamaica and Barbados. But I want to make sure people know that like it's not universally true.
Right. And I think there's a lot of discussion that we could go over with GIs and all of that. And I think that's such a huge subject in and of itself that probably merits a series of episodes. And we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but I think there's room to continue discussing that in the future.
Absolutely. And I mean, things are so in flux with between Barbados, Jamaica, and Demerara rum, GIs that are out there. Right. There's ongoing developments at all times. You can go back and listen to our episode with Richard Seal, which was pretty early on, but has some good details about GIs in general and also the Barbados rum GI. But yeah, like you said, that is a topic we want to return to in kind of its own dedicated episodes, because there's a lot of ins and outs and it's really easy to get stuff wrong with it. So we want to make sure we cover that in depth at an appropriate time where we can really go deep on it.
I want to take a step back here into something that is more divisive. So I'll recognize that immediately to start with. But it's also, I guess you could also kind of see this as a misconception in its own way. So here, I'm trying to approach this in the right way here to have the conversation. But we talk about why those things are important and for GIs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that additives equal a bad product.
Well, I mean, that's not what I am saying by pointing that out. But correct. I do think it's important for people to understand what they're buying. And so if you're going online and reading, hey, Barbados and Jamaica means there will never be sugar added at all times, then it's entirely possible to have an experience that runs counter to that, hence making that a misconception.
Exactly. And that's why I'm trying to kind of point it out with as part of the conversation, because I think it's an important piece of the conversation to understand why there is an importance around that whole concept to begin with. And it's not necessarily to say, and I think Richard has even said, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Richard Seal has even said, look, there's sugared rum has a place.
Has he said that?
Yeah. He said
sure?
something. He has, I think.
I don't know about that.
I think he said something like, if you like sweetened rum, that's fine.
Okay.
But
well, that's a little different from sugared rum has a place.
Yeah,
Those are
maybe
two
so.
different things.
Maybe so. Again, I really don't want to put words in his mouth, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to recall, which was forever ago, him talking about this subject of saying about sweetened rum, and if people like sweetened rum, that's fine, but there needs to be a little bit better delineation and transparency in what that is and how that is, right? For rum consumers to know. When we look at it against bourbon, and I hate to go back to that category, but we know the codification, how bourbon is codified, right? We know that you have this concept of what a bourbon can be and what it is absolutely not.
Well,
rum is lacking that. Right.
And that's interesting because, again, bourbon is a subcategory of whiskey. Right? Bourbon is a type of American whiskey. And so, again, this goes back to GIs in a way, because I think as much as we compare rum to bourbon or rum to scotch, really the comparison to make is rum to the category of world whiskey.
Yes.
And within world whiskey, you have scotch, you have Irish whiskey, you have bourbon, you have rye, you have Japanese whiskey, you have a lot of different things. And most of those things I just mentioned have some sort of internationally recognized and respected regulations and rules.
Right.
Rum does not have those, and that's where GIs come into play, whereas you would have, let's imagine a future where rum looks more like whiskey. You would have distinctive, you would have Barbados rum, you would have Jamaica rum, you would have rum agricole, which in some places that does have those legally recognized categorical definitions and things like that. It doesn't in the United States, for example. It does in the EU. So again, we're getting a little into the weeds with that, but I think, for me, again, by bringing that up, I'm not making a value judgment on sugar and rum. But I do think it's important for people to be able to tell what does and doesn't have it, because people do have individual preferences on that sort of thing. I have individual preferences on that. My individual preference is I don't usually buy rums that have sugar added because I'm not into that. So, for example, it's important for me to know when there is a misconception about rums from a certain place having or not having sugar. Right.
I just think it's an important piece of the conversation for you to say, and for us to be clear about, we're not trying to make a value judgment necessarily on the subject of sweetened rum versus non-sweetened, but why there's an importance around the whole idea. So that's kind of where I was trying to get to with it.
Sure. And I think it's also, it is important to me in the GI conversations, it's important for if a place is known for not having sweetened rums, that should play a factor into how that rule is defined within the GI, for example. So there's some important things to that. And I know there's disagreement within, that very aspect of it.
Yeah. I want to come back to that. Let's put a pin in that for a different conversation.
I'd love to put a pin in that.
All right. I've got one for you to move on here. All right. This one is pretty classic, and I think I hear this a lot from people who are less experienced with it, but yet they may even be experienced to some degree with other spirits, and yet I still hear this commonly thought of, and that is, the darker the color, the better the rum.
Ooh, people say that?
Oh, yes. Or older is better.
Okay, older is better, I've heard, but especially in rum, darker the color, man. If you think Crucian Blackstrap is the best rum possible, then we're going to have some words.
And maybe there's a place for Crucian Blackstrap rum in certain mixed drinks or whatever.
I'm not saying there's not a place for it. I'm just...
But the point there is that it's an obvious misconception from the start, right?
Sure.
That we're making a value judgment now on rum based on what the color and the age is. When we know... And those of us, obviously, who listen to this a lot are going to know how diverse rum is as a category. And that's part of the problem, right? It's a complex thing. Mm-hmm. In whiskey, for instance, I mean, moonshine is not very commonly drank, which is, whiskey before it's aged. With rum, you do have that. You have plenty of unaged rum that is very well respected and regarded, and there's good unaged rum and there's not so good unaged rum.
Well, because it's part of that is because it's all still rum, right?
Right.
Whereas unaged whiskey is not whiskey.
Now, I'm not even trying to talk about the additives portion of this if people are adding color to the rum, right? That's a separate thing, which may happen in many cases because of this exact misconception, is that if it's older, therefore it must be darker because it's picked up more barrel, therefore it must be superior.
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of I think the logic that's being used, and I think a lot of the half truths or non-truths, if you will, that some companies do is they darken this rum to make it appear older and therefore charge more for it because it's older and it's somehow better.
Right. And that's rooted in this value judgment we attach to age, which we've talked many times on the podcast before that.
Right.
And I always go back to like our conversation with Frank Ward when he was talking about, the rums that he made, the triple distilled rums that he did at Mount Gay, and how for him there was this really sweet spot for them and like the younger side of aging, whereas he thought the ones that, Vellier and, Maison Ferrand released that were older, they were not his favorite because they weren't in that sweet spot of that distillate that he produced. So I think that's just a great reminder, like older does not equal better. And as you pointed out, it's just even more confusing in the rum category because we have this whole thing with dark rum.
And light rum. Exactly.
Where, I think to the layperson, they recognize dark rum more than they recognize the idea of aged rum, Yep. And there's dark rum that is aged. There is dark rum that is not aged at all. There's aged rums that aren't darkened. So like there's this whole
tying color to age is already problematic.
Right? Yeah. If I were to have my druthers, then the term dark rum would be reserved only for products that were intentionally darkened.
Yes.
The Hamilton Pot Still Blacks, the Crucian Blackstrap, stuff like that, where they're intentionally made very dark because that's what they're going for. But that's a whole very confusing aspect of rum. Yeah. And
before we get too far, I have to say that you give me crap for calling this a program. I'm giving you crap for saying if you had your druthers.
That's just one of those expressions that I think is funny.
Wow.
The word druthers is funny. Like, what are druthers? And when you get them, what happens? I
have no idea, but I'm fairly sure that most people under the age of 75 don't say that, Will.
Well, can I move on to one that is somewhat related to that, I think?
Okay.
It's another numbers-based thing. This idea, and I see this a lot, ester count seen as a spectrum of quality, where the higher the ester count of a rum, the better it's perceived to be. And again, this to me works a lot like the age conversation, where I think it's entirely a subjective thing, and to some people, the older the rum is, the better it might taste to them. I think the same thing with ester count is at play, where some people really love seeking out high ester rums and they want the highest possible. But to me, there's not a linear scale of quality that goes up with esters. Or even like a lot of times people talk about them in terms of like they have more flavor. And I would quibble with that just in my subjective experience. I think you can have rums with lower ester counts that are incredibly flavorful because ester count doesn't necessarily capture everything about the chemical makeup of a rum. Like there's other stuff going on in there. A lot of times ester count is only counting one type of ester, and there's other types of esters. There's also all sorts of volatile components and things like that. I don't want to turn this into a chemistry lesson, but sometimes I see people in conversations like almost feeling like a little bashful about admitting that like maybe they like one of Hampton's lower ester marks as opposed to, the higher ones. Like they feel a little sheepish for saying that they, like the L Rock more than the Diamond H or something like that.
Right.
And I don't think people should feel that way about it. I think taste is subjective, and if something tastes better to you or more flavorful to you, that doesn't mean that it's not.
It's a weird thing that we kind of confuse, we being anybody, including myself sometimes, confuse scarcity and extreme with quality.
That's a good point. And that, again, I'm not saying like, DOK doesn't have a place for being consumed neat or that, that kind of thing. I think if you like it, that's awesome. I have enjoyed seeking out those really high ester marks and trying them on their own. It's super interesting to get to experience stuff like that.
I agree.
But I think when there becomes this like obsession with a high number, meaning it's the best, that's where
Yeah.
like the conversation turns me off a little bit.
Yeah.
And I texted you a few weeks ago. So, a friend gave me this book about whiskey that was written by Nicholas Morgan called Everything You Need to Know About Whiskey But Are Too Afraid to Ask. And it was published in conjunction with the Whiskey Exchange, which many of our listeners may know from ordering rum for them. They carry many great rums and things like that. But there's this passage about Scotch that really stood out to me, and particularly Islay Scotch, which is known for its kind of smoky characteristic. Do you remember me texting this passage to you?
I do.
So I want to read it real quickly because it's talking about the kind of smoky characteristic that Islay Scotch is known for.
I love me some Islay Scotch. Keep
I know
going.
you do.
Yeah.
So here's the passage from the book. It says, "This distinctive character is still produced by open peat fires that drive smoke through the drying malted barley, and as such, the peating process is the most difficult to control. Distillers have exacting specifications for the phenolic content of the malt they use, measured by ppms, which stands for phenolic parts per million. But these are often only achieved by blending together various batches of malt with differing peating levels to reach the desired number. Some malt whiskey enthusiasts are transfixed by ppms, always looking for the biggest number and their next hit. In whiskey culture, where the appreciation of extremes is often mistaken for knowledge or connoisseurship, some go in search of the smokiest whiskey, as if on a quest to find the hottest curry after a night of indiscriminate beer drinking." So this reminded me somewhat a little bit when I texted it to you of ester counts and how they're talked about. And again, I don't want to besmirch high ester rums. I love high ester rums. Like I go seeking them out too. But I think in doing so, sometimes we create this perception that the higher the ester count, the better the rum. And I think that's a false perception. But as you pointed out, often those rums are more scarce. And historically, they have been much more difficult to produce and have often even fetched higher prices, in bulk sales and stuff like that, because they're so flavorful, because they're more scarce, because they are more expensive to make because of the production methods involved. So again, that all feeds into that perception a little bit. But I think just sometimes when I see people almost feel like hesitant to admit they like the lower ester rum, I want to say, like, don't feel bad. It's fine. Like those are great rums too. So that's just what I wanted to bring up.
It's like you climb a mountain with somebody, you get to the top of, like, I don't know, Mount Rainier or something, and then somebody next to you is like, Psh, this is nothing. You should go to Kilimanjaro, Or this is nothing, really. What you need to do is climb Mount Everest. As if there's not an inherent value in what you have in front of you. And like you mentioned, it's subjective at the end of the day. And I do think there's value to seeking it out for rum connoisseurs and hobbyists like us because we find it fun and we're exploring. But I certainly would agree that it doesn't necessitate that it's the best product by any shape or form.
So let's go on. What do you have next?
All right, I have a few here. I'm trying to figure out which one I should pick. This should be an ongoing series for us because there's plenty here.
Yeah, that's why we're by no means like. People who are fans of rum know that there are enough misconceptions to fill a book, so we're not going to get to all of them today. We'll come back to this in a future episode, and like my dream is to have a bunch of episodes all linked together, like 2 years from now, so people can pull them up and go through all the misconceptions at their leisure. But yeah, so hit me with your next one.
This is one that I'm going to confess this has happened to me.
Okay.
And honestly, if I'm really, truly, bluntly honest with myself now, I think it still may apply every now and then. It's the more you pay for it, the better it is.
Oh, wait, are you saying that you subscribe to that?
I'm not saying I subscribe to that. But yet, even though I know that the price doesn't equal quality, it's hard for me to sometimes differentiate out of my head when I see, let's say, two similar rums.
Okay.
And I say one is $60 and one is $85, right? Maybe they're even from the same distillery. And maybe one, the only slight difference here is one is, I don't know, slightly older, or one is they're slightly different in some way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
My brain says, Well, that one is more expensive because it must be better.
Right.
Like, it's hard for me to get out of that mindset is what I'm saying. So even though I know that there are tons of rums out there, by the way, that are in a category that I would say is very affordable and still excellent rums, there's a part of me that always kind of looks at that $150 bottle and I want to try that because it has to be that price for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've just been like conditioned to have that expectation, not even just in rum, but just in general. But even in our last episode, I think it was our last episode where at the beginning I talked about Appleton, the new Appleton 15 versus Appleton 21. And for me, it's almost like I do have to step back and like be like, wait a second, do I actually think, I know Appleton 21 is more expensive and I will probably buy Appleton 15 because I think it's a better value. But do I have the gall to say that the less expensive one is better than the more expensive older one? And you almost have to like go against your programming to get to a place where you can say that. But that's what I arrived at. Like I just think the 15 is a better rum, even though it's significantly cheaper. So yeah.
I mean, and like we said, it's subjective. And I know there's plenty of people that argue with you that say the 21 is still better than the 15 for them. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's an amount of subjectivity in there, but what's not subjective is the pricing, right? And so we can say, as a matter of fact, there's this price for this rum, and for whatever reason, they've priced it that way. Some, I presume, talking about marketing, some are marketed more expensive simply because that's their strategy.
Right.
They say, knowing what we just discussed, these companies know that, right?
Right.
So they're going to say, well, we're going to put out these lines, and we're going to put out this one that's $150 a bottle, put it in a fancy bottle, but it's mostly the same stuff.
And sometimes some of that increase in that markup is going to pay for that fancy bottle that you love so much that you can't get enough of with your fancy cork bottles and thick
good shapes,
glass,
cool, yes,
it's destroying the environment, but you've got to have
gold leaf print. Boxes of nice, leather boxes. I admit I fall prey to that a lot. So maybe this goes in line with that too, is that somewhere deep within me is this value of like price and aesthetic equals quality. But it really doesn't. And my brain, my human brain, as opposed to my lizard brain, knows
you have two?
That I have lots in there. I have a lot. No, you know what I'm talking about.
I know what the lizard brain is, yeah.
Yes. So my lizard brain gets swayed by the pricing argument, but I think it's also battling my human brain because there's legitimate reasons for prices to be higher as well.
Sure.
Right?
I mean,
so it's almost a guessing game.
The reason why price tends to correlate with age is because it's literally more expensive to age rum for longer. So they need to charge more for it.
Right. And more angel share means you've got less of it after that long. So it's taking longer. So the investment is there. And then there's less of it when you get there where you want to be. Therefore, the scarcity drives up the cost and the price. So that's the logical side of my brain is, factoring all these things in as I'm standing in the aisle looking at all of these options, and I'm wondering to myself, is this crap marketing or is this a legitimate reason that this rum is more impressive, I guess you would say, to use a word. And yet it doesn't always follow. I'll tell you, I'm not going to name the bottle because I don't like throwing out things that especially I paid a lot for and didn't enjoy as much. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to throw it on blast, but I will say there was a bottle I recently purchased. I'm not going to put it on blast.
I think it's usually put it on blast, yeah.
Yeah, put it on blast. But there was a bottle I recently purchased more than $150, which is rare for me to do. But although I appreciate it for what it is, I think it is an example of a tropically aged 17-plus year rum that is a Caribbean rum. Mm-hmm. I don't really enjoy it that much.
Do you think it's because do you think it's aged too long for your taste for
Correct.
that specific rum?
I think it's over-oaked. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It tastes bitter and over-oaked for me. Am I happy about it because there's this? I have this information of it's a certain mark. I have a lot of good transparent information on the bottle, and I like that about it. But yeah, I would never buy that again.
Interesting.
Just because the drinkability is really just not there for me. There's this whole weird thing, I guess, going on about, well, what is, at the end of the day, what is this is like the most philosophical episode we've ever had. But I was going to say, what is the purpose of rum? What are you doing with it? Well, it's, you want to drink it and enjoy it, right? That, to me, That's what I would say the purpose of rum is, to experience it, to enjoy it, and have that experience of drinking
Hopefully
it.
it's to drink it and not just to collect it.
Right. So for me, that's what it is. So at the end of the day, getting swayed by things like, I'll call myself out, how it looks in the bottle, even though I still think there's something there psychologically, or the being priced and being like, yeah, I have that bottle and it's $150 bottle of rum, so you can like show off to somebody or something.
Right.
That's not what I want to do. So yeah, I just think it's a tough one.
Can I follow on that one?
Please.
I'll do one more and then we can close it out. But this is one that's related to the idea of age, and you even brought up the concept of tropical aging and angel share. Mm-hmm. But can I tell you something about aging in the tropics?
What?
I don't know if you knew this. Did you know that rum ages faster in the tropics?
I've heard this.
You've heard this. I know you have.
But wait a second. It ages what it ages, right?
Okay, this is what I'm getting into. So, obviously, there is a big difference between rum that is aged in a tropical environment. And I'm not trying to lump every tropical environment together, because if you take a rum and age it in Barbados and you take that same rum and age it in Fiji,
yeah,
the resultant rums after the same amount of time are still going to taste different, because there's all sorts of environmental factors and everything. But
exactly.
What people are aware of is that when you're in that kind of tropical environment with high humidity, you're going to have a much higher angel share. The rum is going to interact with the wood in ways faster than it would if it were aged in a more temperate, cooler climate, like say a Scotland or something like that. So a lot of times you'll see people, making references to rum ages differently in the tropics, which is totally true. Again, I'm 100% on board with that. But this is an actual quote that I looked up on the Appleton Rum website right now. It says, It is estimated that our tropical climate causes the rum to age roughly 2 to 3 times faster than if it were in a cooler climate. And this is, for me, where the language here gets to a little bit of a bridge too far, because then it gets into the idea, again, you were saying this is our most philosophical episode.
It is, apparently,
and here's where I'm going to get to, well, what does age mean to you? What does age, the act of aging, what does that entail?
Time.
If aging entails just a certain amount of chemical interactions or changes taking place, then maybe that's true, because some things do happen faster in those environments than they do in others. But to me, time is irrevocably linked to the idea of aging. And as many scientific methods that exist right now to examine what happens when a spirit is aging, I'm still skeptical that we have managed to fully understand every single thing that happens during the aging process. And so for me, that element of time is critical to the idea of aging. And again, I am 100% on board for producers in different environments showcasing to consumers what is unique about their aging environment and what it does. And again, if you want to say our angel share is greater here, it evaporates quicker here than it does elsewhere, these chemical things occur sooner here than they do if we aged in this environment, I'm all on board for that. But when it gets simplified to this idea of stuff ages faster here, that to me, it doesn't sit right with me. And I looked up a few different other places that I knew talked about, aging at origin in a tropical environment, just to see how it was phrased in other places. And so this is from the Rum GM website. It says, in Martinique, the evaporation, parentheses angel share, represents plus or minus 8% of the total volume of the barrels every year and approximately 1 to 2% of ABV per year. Because of the constant 90% humidity and high temperatures year-round in Martinique, the aging process is highly accelerated compared to that in Kentucky or Cognac. So highly accelerated aging process. This feels a little better to me because they say the aging
closer.
process.
Yep.
So it's talking about stuff that happens during aging is highly accelerated. It's not saying it ages faster necessarily.
I'll buy that. The first one sounds like they have a DeLorean down there in Jamaica.
Exactly. And then I pulled out my bottle of Hampton 46, which actually this is, I just pulled out the box that I happen to have next to my computer here. This is from the first edition of this rum that came out, which I believe was aged for 7 years. I think it's now aged 8 years. But it says, it has a little section on that label that I love so much that says fully matured in the tropics. And then it says aging for 7 years in a tropical climate produces an angel's share equivalent to 25 years aging in continental weather. So that to me, again,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's, and again, I get that that's a geekier explanation and that might not make any sense to a casual consumer. So I understand wanting to, I'm a copywriter in my day job. I operate in the world of marketing. So I understand why someone would want to say rum ages faster here.
I was going to get you there. Yeah.
I'm just saying I don't, it doesn't sit right with me. And I feel like it's simplifying it down to the point of misinformation a little bit in a way, or slightly misleading. And again, I want these producers in the Caribbean to be able to showcase what makes aging at origin so special and so great and so worthy of a higher price, because for so long people couldn't get rum that was aged in that environment, and those distilleries couldn't capture all the profits that came with selling rum that they aged right there at origin themselves. So I want to see more of that. I just let's educate and talk about it in a way that is entirely non-misleading.
I think it's interesting. Your argument there actually was really well laid out in how you brought us to where you did with it, and I think it would be hard to disagree. The interesting thing is you're making a value judgment now on copy, right? With words and how that's pushed across, and how to you're seeing that as, like you said, you almost feel like it's disingenuous the way they put it there. I can almost guarantee you, I don't want to speak for them either, but I can almost guarantee you that was not an intentional, like, they were just trying to figure out, how do we explain this to people in one sentence or less, right? With Appleton.
Well, yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying like, I'm not putting this in the category of lying about an age statement or a misleading age statement or something like that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think there's something malicious.
Right.
It's a desire to, I think, differentiate from other products on the market. And also, again, like it's the simplest way to mostly understand what they're talking about. But to me, it's a little misleading at the same time. And I think
it's just incorrect, right?
Yeah.
It's plain old incorrect. You don't age faster. The only way to do that would be relative motion.
I've always
right?
felt the same way about all of the quote unquote accelerated aging technologies out there.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's not accelerated aging. I get that your technology is causing some of these chemical processes and things to take place that happen during the aging process, and you're causing them to happen sooner. But to me, that is still, that's not accelerating aging, because aging is aging. Aging means time passing. So anyway, wow. Super into the weeds on this one, but hey.
Well, it was a fun conversation, and I think we should continue to do more of it, because I mean, there are reasons why these misconceptions exist, right?
Yeah.
Or myths, or whatever we want to call them, or even just conversations like we just had, including the GI is a huge one, but also these other ones. And the reasons are because sometimes it's not entirely easy to have these conversations.
Yeah. It really isn't. Like, and I'm, if there were certain things that we got wrong in this, which is entirely possible. Yes. So please let us know if so, and we will issue corrections.
Yes.
But yeah, and even like, writing down notes on some of these before the episode, making sure I had all my ducks in a row and understood everything, in order to talk about this stuff, like, it requires, it's really easy to get something wrong, and that's the whole spirit of what we're trying to do, is to
no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. is to get past that and correct it.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all enjoyed some of this as much as we did, or all of it. And hopefully we can have a similar discussion in the future. If there are other myths or misconceptions or miscreants, as I said earlier, that are doing things in rum that you wanted to be discussed and to hear us talk about, let us know. Contact us at host@rumcast.com. We will answer you there on email as soon as we can. And or we can also do social media as well. Usually social media is my domain, but Will, I'm going to give you a shot at it this time and see where are we at on social media.
Oh man, I think we're at the Rumcast on
That's correct.
Facebook and Instagram.
Ding, ding, ding,
Is
ding.
that correct?
That is correct. You are correct. Wow. And also Twitter. We've been upping our Twitter game, and Will, you're in charge of the YouTube channel, so I'm surprised you somehow forgot about that. So the YouTube channel has been blossoming. We're seeing subscribers now, even though we haven't pushed the video side of the content there. Which, Will, we got to get on that.
That's right. We're just trying to give people as many convenient places to listen as they want. So yeah, there's no added video component there, but you can listen to us on YouTube if that's your thing. But yeah, as John said, we would love to hear what myths, misconceptions, or your sort of least favorite marketing speak things. Send them in. I mean, we only got through maybe a quarter of my list personally, so there's a ton more. We obviously didn't want to release a 4-hour episode of us talking about all this stuff, so we'll drip these out over time and hopefully add to them, because myths and misconceptions, they're not static. There's new ones happening all the time, so we'll try to stay on top of them.
All right, thank you all so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you back next time.
Yep.